Hi guys, it's Kathy. I hope you're doing well. I got a trial for you. It's an 18-day long trial. Um, I'm gonna try to you know, get it out as quick as I can as videos for you to watch. And I didn't see the whole thing yet, but what I saw, I couldn't look away. I don't know why. It's nothing big. It's nothing, you know, it was a couple months ago in Arizona, but I don't know. I was riveted. I was riveted the whole time. So I'm gonna show it to you guys. You guys can be riveted too. Day one. Here we go. The calm before the storm. Jury trial. And yes, we do have a verdict.
Thank you. Everyone, please be seated. All right, we're back on the record. Show the presence of all counsel, defendant, and all the jurors. So, I'm sure you know the good news. Water's back on. Thank you for your understanding. Not that you had a lot of choice in the matter. Understanding, patience, and cooperation. And we also sent the cleaning crew back up there afterwards and to clean the whole thing out. And we got a great crew, so hopefully everything's back. All right, before we get going, I just want to talk briefly with counsel real quick on something. If you put your headsets on.
This is new. So we could hear those little taps. Oh, Discord. I forgot. I can almost hear him. Can the jury see him? Do you think the jury can? I mean, if he's in the same room and speaking out loud, can they not hear him? Is the jury in a separate room in Arizona? This is really weird. This is really interesting. He's covering his mouth.
We're back on the record with the jury, and whenever the state is ready, you can proceed. Continue with your opening statement.
Thank you, Judge. So good afternoon, everyone. We were talking about this visual that is up on the screen now. And the reason why I was showing you this visual again is I wanted to tell you that you're going to hear some testimony from two officers from the Department of Public Safety from the aerial photographs. And they also did something called a Leica scan of the area. And a Leica scan is a more detailed type of analysis where they take really detailed measurements so that they can do measurements of the scene that are accurate and to scale. And so this is the drone photo with the measurements, but you'll also hear from a Sergeant Cafton who did the Leica scan for us as well. And then again, as I indicated, Trooper Reyna is going to testify about the drone footage. The next officers you're going to hear from are an FBI agent who assisted the detectives in downloading Mr. Kelly's cell phone. Our detectives aren't up to speed or weren't at the time up to speed on some new cell phone data called Cellbrite. And that data, that software is what we use to download people's cell phones. So we can look at their text messages, their photos, and their phone calls, those sorts of things. And so the FBI, you'll hear from the FBI agent who assisted with that download, and you'll hear from Detective Mario Barba. He's actually the tall detective that was in that photograph you saw. So you'll meet him when he comes in to talk about those cell phone downloads. And he did something called a physical download of the defendant's cell phone. You'll learn that the defendant's cell phone was kind of an older model phone, so the Cellbrite software wasn't actually able to open it because the software was old on it. And so what we actually had to do was go through the phone and physically examine and take photographs of things as opposed to the normal download we would do. And you're going to hear about some of those text messages. And they really give you some insight into what was happening with George Kelly in the weeks leading up to the homicide. And you'll see this is just sort of a flavor of those text messages, and you'll see all of them as we go through the testimony from Detective Barba and Agent Douglas. And this is kind of the flavor. He's sending texts to his friend a couple of weeks before the homicide saying, overrun with drug cartel, AK getting a lot of work. Pick of drug runner carpet tracks, and one of the CBP agents will explain what carpet tracks are to you. Those are essentially booties that migrants use to try to cover their sign as they're walking through the desert. They call them carpet.
Your Honor, can we have a conference briefly?
Get your headset on, woman. You're gonna miss the conference. Mine's bigger. Who's the bailiff yelling at? Taser. No, don't taser. She's just in the gallery. Do you think that the defense attorney didn't like the term carpet shoes or whatever? It takes a lot to object in the middle of an opening statement. I wonder if this is how it's going to go. It's really interesting once we get to it. He's hiding. He's like a football coach. He's hiding the next play from the jury. I want to know what she objected to.
Back on the record with the jury, you can continue.
Sorry for the interruption. As I was saying, the first text message talks about Mr. Kelly on January 13th of 2023, which is just 2 weeks before the homicide, is texting his friend Gary Miller, overrun with drug cartel, AK getting a lot of work. And then a second one, pick of drug runner carpet tracks, 33 dealt with this week, AKA hot, AK hot. And then you'll see there's actually a text to his son on that same day. His son is Matt Kelly. And that text message says, 33 drug runners this week, pick attached is of drug runner carpet booties, AK-47 hot, wanna be backup. And his son responds with a note and a hand emoji with the thumb down. And he says, be careful. And Mr. Kelly responds, careful is not an option. It's either fight or run, and I'm too old to run. Mom is L&L or locked and loaded also. So that's some of the text messages that you're going to see. And you're also going to hear from a number of expert witnesses in this case. One of the expert witnesses you're going to hear from is Aaron Brudnell, and he's a weapons specialist. He's going to come in and talk to you about the functionality of the AK-47, that it actually works. He's going to tell you that the AK-47 matches to the casings that were located on the defendant's patio. that we showed you, those 9 casings earlier in the photographs. He's going to talk about something called an ejection pattern for the AK-47. He's going to talk to you about, and what that means essentially is when the spent casings eject from the AK-47, what pattern did they normally land in? That's called an ejection pattern. So he'll talk to you about what the ejection pattern for this weapon is, and you'll learn why that's important from the experts as they testify. He's also going to talk to you about an examination of the victim's clothing. He's going to tell you that he didn't see any soot or any stippling. And what that tells you is that this was not a close-up shot. We know it wasn't a close-up shot. We know Mr. Kelly shot from his back patio, but this just confirms that determination. Next, you're going to hear from 2 other experts from the Arizona Department of Public Safety Crime Lab, and they're both forensic scientists as well. And these 2 forensic scientists did some work essentially just to check the boxes to make sure. We don't expect that on a casing we're going to find any DNA or any fingerprints. And that's because of how hot it is inside the weapon. That just burns off any DNA or any fingerprints. But we went ahead and checked those casings anyway for fingerprints and DNA, and we didn't find any fingerprints on the casings, and we also preserved whatever was on the casings as far as DNA goes. But again, that was really just a checkbox, not really expecting to find anything. The next outside expert witness you're going to hear from is a man named Rick Wyant. And Rick Wyant is also a forensic scientist. He has his own consulting company, but he also works for a state crime lab in another state. Mr. Wyant is the shooting reconstructionist in this case. He's the ballistics expert. He's going to talk to you about the shooting reconstruction and also about something called bullet wobble. You'll see that he'll talk to you a little bit about how the shape of the entry wound is for the gunshot wound, and that there was a little bit of wobble on that. And he'll explain to you what that could be caused by. Hitting a little branch or something like that along the way, on the way that it hit Gabriel. The next expert witness you're going to hear from is Tara Telsell. And Ms. Telsell is a scientist from R.J. Lee Labs. And you'll hear that this information that she's going to provide you comes from trace examination of the victim's clothing. And this was, again, just to determine if this is a close-up shot or a far shot. And she'll explain to you what her findings are when she's here.
Judge is ordering lunch.
You're also going to hear from the medical examiner from the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office that did the forensic autopsy of Gabriel in this case. And she's going to describe for you the injuries to the victim in this case. And I'm going to show you a couple of photographs from the autopsy that show you the entry and the exit wound. This is the entry.
So if you haven't put it together by now, Gabriel is an illegal alien, and Mr. Kelly and his wife bought a border property and live on the border property.
Wound on Gabriel's back, and Dr. Tim will explain to you all of the dimensions of the wound and what that means. And this is the exit wound on Gabriel's chest. And she'll explain to you again what all of the measurements mean and how she knows which is entry and which is exit wound. The other thing she's going to tell you is that she didn't find any stippling or any soot around the entry wound in this case. And again, that's an indication that this is not a close-up shot.
Okay, we got it.
And then finally, she's going to talk to you about the path of the projectile in this case. She's going to talk to you about how the projectile entered through these 3 ribs back here and essentially blew out those ribs and traveled through the ribs, through the right lung, through the pericardial sac, through the ascending aorta, through the sternum, through the parasternal anterior left second rib, and then out. And she's going to give you all the details about that injury and what that means in terms of how long he might have lived,
Judge is
what
crying.
that means with respect to how he could have responded immediately following the shooting. And she'll tell you all about those details. But the one thing that I want to make sure I leave you with is that when we're talking about the evidence in this case, I want to remind you of the words of George Allen Kelly. And I want to remind you that Mr. Kelly told you, I'm not admitting to anything I've done, but all those things tend to add up. And they do add up in this case. And they add up to second-degree murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. All of the items of evidence point toward that. We've got the ballistics and the bullet trajectory, the medical examiner's testimony, the fact that Gabriel's body is 115 yards away from the Kelly residence, the fact that Kelly says that the individuals he saw were 100 to 150 yards away from his residence, the location of the casings, the ejection pattern that you'll learn about from the experts, the information about the horse that you hear from Daniel, and that is corroborated by the defendant's conversation with Jeremy Morcell. The fact that no one heard that alleged first shot except George Allen Kelly. There's no soot or stippling on the wounds, indicating this is not a close-up shot. And Kelly admits that he shot his AK-47, and we have matched the casings by his patio to his AK-47. And Kelly admits that these people weren't coming toward his house. They weren't approaching him. They weren't any kind of threat to him. They were going parallel to his residence. And I just mentioned the AK-47 matched the casings. And then finally, you'll have the testimony of Daniel,
And the shot was from far away.
who will tell you what he observed that day. And all of those things will lead you to find that the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant's guilty of these charges. The state's evidence will leave you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt in this case. The defendant has told the officer that he was conscious of the consequences of his actions and he would take responsibility for those actions. We're going to ask you to hold him to that and to find him guilty at the end of this trial of these two charges: second-degree murder for the death of Gabriel Cohen-Butimea and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for Daniel Ramirez. Thank you.
All right, this next
Thank you, Ms.
lawyer is
Hunley.
great.
Does the defense wish to give an opening statement? Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me? These are working. Okay. If I start to get too quiet or if these stop working, just wave at me because I want to make sure we can hear what's being said here. You guys haven't heard much from me yet. My name's Brenna Larkin. I represent George Allen Kelly, and that's who I want to talk to you about today, because the state talks a lot here today about what they say happened on January 30th of last year. And I want to talk about everything that led up to that incident so that you have an idea and you can put that incident into context when you're actually hearing the evidence. And the evidence is going to describe some of Mr. Kelly's background. The evidence is going to show that Mr. Kelly is born in the Carolinas. He grew up always in rural areas. He's always hunting. He's always fishing, mostly fishing. That's his life ever since he's a young boy. And he goes to college, graduates college. He marries Wanda, who's his high school sweetheart, and they start a life together, he and his wife. Mr. Kelly works with fish and wildlife for a very long time. It allows him to be outdoors. It allows him to be in nature. It allows him to be close to the things that he loves and doing the things that he loves. Eventually, he and Wanda decide to move to Montana because he takes a job out there, and the trout fishing in Montana is the best in the whole world. That's why he wants to be there. He winds up working for Fish and Wildlife on an Indian reservation and working with the tribe that's out there. Eventually, the state takes over the tribal land, and his job no longer exists for him out in Montana. He's offered positions in different places, but all of those positions are desk jobs in a city, which to him is just not something that he can do. So he and his wife decide to stay in Montana, and they open up a lodge. They open up an Orvis Lodge that involves taking people on guided trips to go fishing, to go hunting, and they operate that as a family for many, many years. He and his wife have 2 sons. The sons help work on the lodge as well, and they're all very happy. Wanda's a school teacher. Mr. Kelly really, really likes living in Montana. Wanda thinks it's too cold, and Wanda has always wanted to move to Arizona ever since she was a child. She saw pictures of Arizona in a book, and that was her dream. So she and Alan, and I'm going to call him Alan. He's George Allen Kelly, but Mr. Kelly is his father, and nobody calls him George. So if I call him Alan, that's who I'm talking about. Alan and Wanda made a deal. Alan said to Wanda, if you come with me to Montana, and if you live here for as long as we can for our career, for my career, and if you support me, then after a certain amount of time, I'll move with you to Arizona. And eventually, Wanda holds him to that, and they come to Arizona. They first go through Flagstaff, but Wanda sees snow, so they have to keep going further south. And eventually, they wind up down in southern Arizona. They don't purchase the property where he's at right away. They have some other ranching property nearby that's in a different location at first, but eventually they purchase the property where this incident took place. And they purchased that property many, many years ago. I believe 20 or so years ago is when they actually purchased that property. So he and Wanda have been out there for a very long time. They had to build their house there. They had to fence the whole property in order to put cattle on the property to run their ranch. And they've been living there ever since. It's the dream home, and that's where they want to be. Alan, not being from here and never living close to the border, never really knew anything about illegal immigration. It just wasn't something that was in his mind when he came down here. He had his first experience, his first encounter ever with illegal immigrants when he was putting up fence posts trying to fence his property. He and a couple of folks were helping him build the fence, and he describes stumbling upon a group of people. And he didn't really know what was happening. He'd never encountered something like this before. But he saw this group of people. The group of people looked scared when he and his workers ran into them. And he just remembers in the moment thinking, this is strange, and they look scared. So he said, está bien. He has limited Spanish now, but he knows how to tell them it's okay. And his first impression, he was confused, and the folks who were helping him build his fence tell him, oh, those are illegal aliens. That's what you just saw. And so he had to start learning about what that was. That was never something that he'd ever encountered before. And he describes that first encounter as very heartbreaking to him. He saw people, and he saw families, and he saw that people were hurting. He saw that people were desperate, and he saw that people were scared. And that was the first impression he had of illegals on his property. And he's building the fence. He hasn't put any wire up yet. He learns that it's likely there will be more such people who are coming across his property. And he thinks, well, I mean, that's not great, but what can I do about it? And so he purchases some smooth wire for the fence. The top strands on the fence are barbed wire. The bottom wire is smooth wire. Because he knows if people are going to be coming through, He at least doesn't want anybody to get hurt. Over the years, and again, it's many years he's on this property, over the years he sees some more things start to transpire. He doesn't see people close up very frequently. He sees people from a distance, if he sees people at all. He sees people who are family groups, and he knows they're family groups because they're people who are men, who are women, who are children, all sort of traveling together. In the early days, everybody's wearing ordinary clothing, so no different from the clothing you might see if you just walk around outside today. And in the early days, he doesn't encounter very many problems, and he doesn't feel afraid. He feels these people are actually more afraid of me than I am of them, because they run when they see me, they get scared. He starts to pick up on, as he goes out, and he goes out every day on his ranch. He's a cattle rancher. He's out there every day. He sees trails. He sees tracks. He sees different signs throughout the day, every day, of people coming through his property. He sees what he describes as campsites, meaning a place where people stay for longer, or perhaps past the night. In these areas, he finds water bottles, he finds clothing, he finds discarded food items, all sorts of things just to tell him, even though I didn't see people, I know people were here because here's signs of people being here. And he learns over the years where these sites are. And over the years, as he's out on his property, if he happens to have a water bottle with him, he'll leave a water bottle at one of those sites because he doesn't want anything bad to happen to anybody on his property. He's a compassionate man, and he doesn't want people on his property, but he understands that people have their own lives and they're trying to do something out of desperation. He starts to communicate with Border Patrol. These ranches that are on the border have a program called a Ranch Liaison Program. And that program involves a person, the ranch liaison, whose job it is to connect with these ranchers on the border, establish rapport, establish communication with them, in order that this rancher who's out here in this vast area can have somebody to access, to talk to, whenever something happens or whenever something is seen. And so over the years, Mr. Kelly becomes familiar with a number of ranch liaisons who cycle through that position. He reports things to the ranch liaison that he sees. He's told by the ranch liaison, if it's a criminal issue, you can call 911. If it's a border issue, so if there's an issue with any kind of illegal immigration on your property, call the ranch liaison. The ranch liaison also sends information to the ranchers. So if the ranch liaison is aware that there's a big group of people in a certain area, if it's near a ranch, the ranch liaison will communicate that to the rancher to say, here's a heads up, I'm letting you guys know there's this number of people in your area, things of that nature. If Mr. Kelly were to ever see a helicopter circling his property, for example, and he doesn't know what's going on, he calls the ranch liaison because that's whose helicopter that is, and they're going to know what's going on, and they'll inform him of what's going on. So Mr. Kelly establishes this relationship and this rapport with Border Patrol over the years. He learns over the years that the response time to his property is not necessarily very fast. So if he calls somebody, he might not get somebody out there for 15 minutes or something like that. And by that time, whoever was there is gone. Whatever he saw is no longer there. That's just the nature of reality on the ground for Mr. Kelly out there. This is all pretty fine and dandy for many, many years. And then things start to change. Mr. Kelly starts to see different things. He's not seeing as many family groups anymore. Mr. Kelly starts to see individuals carrying backpacks, men, always men, carrying backpacks and going along the fence lines. He knows that these are individuals engaged in illegal activity because when they see him, they run away. Still, people run away from him. And then things change. and things change in a very dangerous and a very frightening way for Mr. Kelly and for his wife. Mr. Kelly starts to see larger groups, and he starts to see larger groups of all men carrying large backpacks. At first, he doesn't see any weapons, but he's seeing a difference. These aren't the same family groups that he saw when he first started living on this property. This is something else. He talks to the ranch liaison. They communicate with him. He learns that there's drugs in this area. There's human trafficking in this area. There are other things going on besides family groups coming through here. The ranch liaison communicate with Mr. Kelly eventually, and they never used to say this before, but they start to say, there's a group in your area. Be careful. Don't try to stay, if while there's this group in this area, don't go out. They communicate different messages like that. It used to be you run into a group of people, it's no problem. People might be scared, they might be afraid that you'll report them or something, but this is different. Something has changed. Now there's more fear coming from Mr. Kelly and from his wife. He doesn't know anymore who he's going to run into when he's out on his property. And eventually, over the years, he has a couple encounters where he starts to see weapons. He sees, again, these groups of men carrying backpacks, and this time he'll see a rifle, maybe 2 rifles. Things start to get much more dangerous. This isn't what it used to be. On at least one occasion, somebody takes a shot at Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly gets fired at least one occasion. On that particular occasion, Mr. Kelly didn't have a rifle with him. He had his pistol with him, which he carried with him a lot, but he didn't have a rifle. And the person who fired the shot was so far away, his pistol would be ineffective. So Mr. Kelly dropped down into the grass and he waited and he hoped. And he hoped that nothing further was going to happen. And he stayed there for about 15 minutes before he was able to gather himself and come in. Over the years, he's reported a number of incidents to law enforcement involving either seeing people or hearing shots, being approached by people, those sorts of things. Over the years, he's made a number of reports. And typically, the report gets investigated. Law enforcement comes. They take Mr. Kelly's statement. They can't find anyone because it took too long for them to get out there. The people are gone anyway. And nothing happens other than he's able to report it. But because of this heightened level of danger and this heightened level of risk, Mr. Kelly starts to feel unsafe on his property. And he knows when he goes out, he needs to be armed to protect himself. He also chooses to be armed as a deterrent. He hopes that if people see him, and if they see that he's carrying a rifle, they will leave him alone. And then nothing has to happen. No encounters have to take place. Mr. Kelly does not wish for a violent encounter. This is some of the background coming from Mr. Kelly and his wife. You'll hear them talk about these types of things and what's going on their property. You're also going to hear from a number of different Border Patrol agents who have experience out in that property and in that general area and who know the area. Border Patrol knows what's going on out there. They know which types of people are out there and what they're doing. And this is an area, Mr. Kelly's ranch is about 1.5 miles north, as the crow flies, from the border wall. And you're going to hear something called the end of the wall. You're going to hear that described by witnesses in this case. 1.5 miles south of Mr. Kelly's property is the international border between the United States and Mexico. And there's a wall out there, and then it ends. There's a very tall wall. It's metal. It has razor wire on top. It's pretty big and pretty imposing, pretty difficult to climb over or get around. And then it just stops. that wall just stops. And after that, there's a little barbed wire fence, and there's what are called Normandy barriers, which are sort of metal crisscross things that will stop a vehicle, but they won't stop people. And so you're going to hear that the walls can be effective in moving traffic. So traffic that might come through closer to Nogales now has to move further out and come across here where the wall ends, which is right near Mr. Kelly's property. And so this is a corridor. Mr. Kelly's property is in a corridor of illegal traffic. And you'll hear that that illegal traffic includes human smuggling and drug smuggling. You'll hear that there are different sort of jobs, I suppose, or positions involved with this illegal traffic. There are scouts and their guides, who are people who are working to facilitate both human and drug smuggling. So a scout is a person who's going to typically be stationed at a high point on a mountain with binoculars, who can survey an area visually. They're typically wearing camouflage, typically trying to conceal themselves, and they have a radio with them so that they can see where Border Patrol is, they can see where a group is that might be going through for whatever reason, they can see where the pickup point is, and they can relay this information on the radio to the bad guys on the ground who are trafficking the people or trafficking the drugs through the area. You're also going to hear that out there are guides or coyotes, but the coyotes are the guides, and those are the folks who are guiding groups of people through this area. A guide will have a radio. A guide might be listening on the radio to a scout or to somebody else. A guide will be responsible for bringing either people or people who are carrying drugs or just people to a certain location. You're also going to hear that there are other groups out there that are called either rip crews or bandits, depending on which term you prefer. But there are groups of people out there who try to take advantage of the illegal traffic that's going on. These are people who might confront somebody who's carrying drugs with weapons, steal the drugs from the person who's carrying drugs. These are people who might confront these migrant groups and rob them, because this type of crime doesn't really get reported. If somebody's a migrant and they're in here, they're very vulnerable. If the bad guys go and rob them, it's not frequent that that's reported. So this is just the general character of the type of crime that's happening in this rural area that's out east of Nogales, very near Mr. Kelly's property. You're going to hear that this traffic is controlled. This is not haphazard criminal activity. This is organized criminal activity. And there's a hierarchy of organization involved in these trafficking enterprises. And you're going to hear that everything is controlled, including illegal migration, by these higher up drug trafficking organizations. You're going to hear that nothing goes through there. No drugs, no people, no nothing, no asylum seekers, no nothing, unless there's some sort of knowledge or approval from these organizations who control this territory. As such, you're going to hear that sometimes these organizations will retaliate against a guide, let's say, for various reasons. Perhaps this guide lost a load of drugs that he was supposed to deliver. Perhaps this guide stole a load of drugs that he was supposed to deliver. Perhaps this guide talked to the wrong person, gave information to the wrong person. Perhaps this guide smuggled a little bit extra without permission. Smuggling extra without permission is not allowed either. This is all happening in the area of Mr. Kelly's ranch. This ranch is isolated. it's secluded. There are Border Patrol cameras that are out there looking at the National Forest and looking at some of the properties out there. These cameras are not regularly pointed on Mr. Kelly's property. And the smugglers who use this area, they know how to avoid the cameras. They know how to go under the radar. Smugglers in that area are largely successful at what they do. Smugglers in that area are not keen to have a lot of extra police presence in that area. They've got a good operation going through there. They don't want people coming in there and messing that up for them. Mr. Kelly's property is a good corridor because it's right there north of where the wall ends, which is where people are coming through. And it's also right on the way to a road called Duquesne Road, which goes east to west out there. And that's a good pickup location. People who move drugs and people drop things off into a vehicle takes them somewhere else. Duquesne Road is known for a lot of that sorts of traffic. That's the knowledge that Border Patrol brings to the table about this area and about what's going on out there. Mr. Kelly and Wanda bring knowledge about this area as well, based on what they've seen and based on what they've done over the years. We mentioned too that Mr. Kelly and Wanda both feel less safe over time as they're on this property, as they're receiving this information, and as they're looking at more evidence. And on those campsites that I mentioned where they're finding water bottles, they're finding clothing, they're finding things like that, they're noticing differences in clothing too. They're noticing that there's a lot more camouflage that they're seeing now that they didn't used to see. They're noticing that these water bottles that people are carrying are painted black. So a plastic water bottle that's painted black to avoid reflecting off of anything, to further avoid detection. And they find carpet shoes all over their property on a pretty regular basis. Carpet shoes are, it's a cutout piece of carpet that you put on the bottom of your shoe. And then there's camouflage and Velcro that's sewn into the carpet to attach the carpet to your shoe. And they learned that these are tools that are also used by smugglers to try to avoid being tracked, because Border Patrol tracks people, and carpet shoes, hopefully for the smugglers, tend to avoid that. Carpet shoes are typically discarded when a person gets picked up, because they don't want to be found with carpet shoes later, because that looks pretty suspicious. And so you'll find groups of carpet shoes just dropped in various locations on Mr. Kelly's property at various times. And when Mr. Kelly runs into this, he knows there was a group out here of somebody doing something, and they got picked up from here. Sometimes that's on his property, sometimes it's on roads near his property. It's a common occurrence for Mr. Kelly and his wife out there to have to deal with that. Things get very serious one time when Mr. Kelly is no longer on the property. Mr. Kelly leaves because he and his wife have some property up in the White Mountains. It has to be prepared before they can stay in it. A lot of things have to be de-winterized and stuff like that. But they like to go to the White Mountains in the summer times. Mr. Kelly's away at the White Mountains once when he gets a call from Wanda. And she says that something happened. She doesn't know what, but something happened. There's helicopters everywhere. She doesn't know what's going on. Mr. Kelly and Wanda eventually hear that somebody found a dead body near Mr. Kelly's property. And this is the body of a woman who's been discovered, he believes, in a car. He hears this little secondhand, third-hand knowledge, so he's not sure exactly what happened out there, but he's very concerned. And one of the neighbors tells him that this woman was possibly murdered, and he stops what he's doing, he returns, and he goes back because he doesn't want Wanda to be by herself when all of this is going on. This is the environment that he finds himself in, and this is what he and Wanda are dealing with on a regular basis. They used to feel safe on their property. They don't feel safe on their property anymore. And there's a lot of scary things that are happening around them. They've called law enforcement before, and they know that it takes time to get out there. They have a good relationship with law enforcement. Mr. Kelly continues to report things that he sees, including various cuts in his fences, because back in the day, when you had family groups going through, they would go under the fences by the smooth wire. Not anymore. Now his fences get cut pretty regularly, and his cows will get out, and he has to walk his fences to make sure that he can repair them and things like that. So he's scared every day on his property, and he needs to arm himself every day on his property to try to deter this, to try to protect himself. It's in this context that Mr. Kelly sends text messages that the state put on your screens in front of you during their opening statement. You're going to hear about some of Mr. Kelly's text messages, and the state's going to tell you that this shows that Mr. Kelly is just amping himself up to go do something. He's really getting ready to hurt somebody. He really hates people who are crossing his property, etc. I just want to get out in front of that a little bit and give you folks the context so that when you read those messages, you can understand what Mr. Kelly is saying. In those messages, Mr. Kelly's talking to a friend of his who lives up in the White Mountains. And in those messages, Mr. Kelly is sharing his feelings with his friend. And when men get together to share their feelings, as far as I know, maybe doesn't mean anything, but when they get together to share their feelings, they don't typically say, "Hey man, I'm really scared on my property. There's a lot going on. I feel this is getting out of my control. I hope and pray that nothing will happen to me or my wife, but I'm really scared." Maybe some men do that, but a lot of them don't. A lot of them will say things like, "Hey man, I'm in a war zone over here. Give me some support, buddy." Or, "Hey, guess what happened the other day? I was out there." And they tell stories. They exaggerate. They go over the top to the point of even lying and making things up. They insult each other. They use self-deprecating humor. They talk about how they're too old to run away. "I can't shoot straight, got to shoot a lot of rounds, I'm too old." That's the sort of conversation that we're talking about. We're talking about private conversation between two guys that's crude, that's over-exaggerated, and that could certainly be offensive in some company. What's also never intended to be seen by anybody. This is intended to be private. This is intended to be just a couple of guys who know each other, who have known each other for a very long time, who are trying to blow off steam because of the impossible situation that Mr. Kelly finds himself in. The evidence is not going to show that these messages show that Mr. Kelly is a mean or a violent person, or that Mr. Kelly hates anybody. These messages do not take away from Mr. Kelly's compassionate heart. They do illustrate his fear, and they illustrate his increasing concern about what's happening. They illustrate his knowledge that he might be encountered with something dangerous. They illustrate his fear of being discovered unarmed on his property. And they illustrate his fear of possibly being confronted by armed people on his property, as he has been in the past. And then, on January 30th of 2023, Mr. Kelly is confronted with this threat. January 30th starts out a day like any other day on Mr. Kelly's ranch. He goes outside, he does his chores, he's got his animals, he's checking on them. And then he goes inside to eat lunch. It's a late lunch, it's around 2 o'clock, something like that. His wife, Wanda, is in the house, and she's playing with the cat when this happens. And Mr. Kelly's making his sandwich, and he looks up, and he sees something out of the windows in front of him. From where he's standing, and the state showed you that picture where they showed here's where the body was, here's the view that he got. Mr. Kelly's not standing on his patio when he looks up. He's standing inside his house and looking out windows. That view that the state showed you in that picture, that's impossible to see from where Mr. Kelly's standing inside of his house. You go outside on the patio, it's extremely difficult to see. Inside in the house, absolutely impossible. There's no way Mr. Kelly saw anything out there at that distance from inside his house. But he does see something from inside his house. He sees at least 5 people carrying large backpacks and carrying rifles. And they're going across his property. Window on the left, window on the right. He sees them going from left to right. He says, Wanda, be quiet. Call Jeremy Morcell. Call
15 minutes. That's how long it takes for someone to get out there. They're out there on his property with guns right now. But, I mean, they're walking by. So, still, he's all alone out there.
Call the ranch liaison because he sees these people. That's the person who responds. That's the fastest person who responds to help. Wanda gets her phone. She calls the number. Mr. Kelly feels threatened when he sees these people walking across his property like this with those weapons. Mr. Kelly gets the ranch liaison on the phone. He tells the ranch liaison about what he's seeing. And then he hears a shot. He hears a shot fired. A single shot. He thinks it's the sound of a rifle shot. This happens so fast, but this single shot that he hears changes everything in his mind. He knows that something is happening outside, something violent, something dangerous. That single shot might not be the last shot fired. That might be the first of many shots that he hears. All of this processes through his mind in less than a second. Just hearing that single shot, suddenly everything is different. Suddenly, this might go very badly. Wanda's with him. She didn't hear the shot. Wanda wears hearing aids, and those were fading. And she doesn't hear noises that are happening outside like that, even when they're working to the best of their abilities. But Mr. Kelly heard that shot, and he knew that he and his wife were in danger. Time in a moment like that is really suspended, and people start acting. There's not a lot of logical thought process. There's action. Some people freeze, some people act. And Mr. Kelly acted. He took action in order to protect himself and to protect his wife. Again, he tells Wanda, Wanda, call Agent Morcell. Wanda calls Agent Morcell. Mr. Kelly quickly says, I might be being shot at. I might be returning fire. I'm returning fire. Goes out. Agent Morcell describes this conversation as very quick. He says Mr. Kelly is excited. He says Mr. Kelly is obviously encountering something, because he obviously is. He's inside his house. He cannot see the location where this body is discovered from there, but he's obviously encountering something. That means there's something happening out there that has nothing to do with the location of this body. There's something else happening. Agent Morcell has now been informed. Now Border Patrol and the Sheriff's Department are hopefully on their way. Mr. Kelly knows this. He knows law enforcement's coming, but he knows how slow their response time is, and he knows that the threat that he's encountering is a threat he's encountering right now. Wanda, stay inside. He tells Wanda to stay inside. Wanda is terrified. She stands in the living room in between the windows. She doesn't even want to look outside. She's frozen. She's scared. Mr. Kelly walks outside, He picks up his rifle while he goes outside. He sees his horse running at about 100, 150 yards away, beyond 2 fences. His horse is out there running. His horse is Sonny. Sonny is spooked. Sonny doesn't like gunshots. Sonny heard that single shot too, and he's running. He picked up on the danger too. He's an old horse. He doesn't like to run, and he doesn't do it very often. But when he's scared, he runs. Mr. Kelly wanted to just go out onto the patio with his rifle to be visible so that people could see him and they would run away. They wouldn't encounter him. That was his plan. So he walks outside the metal porch door that he goes out. It shuts with a bang. It's a loud bang. The person who's in front of the group who's leaving turns, sees Mr. Kelly, and points his rifle at Mr. Kelly. This is another one of those moments, like hearing that single shot. He sees a rifle. A rifle is pointed at him. Mr. Kelly is threatened. There are armed criminals on his property. He's already heard a shot. Maybe another shot is about to be fired, and maybe it's about to be fired at him. He believes that his life is in imminent danger. He knows that Wanda is in the house behind him. He knows her life is also in imminent danger, and he has to stop the threat. He has to stop it from happening. He makes a split-second decision. He doesn't shoot this person. He doesn't use lethal force, even though he had every right to do so. He doesn't. He raises his rifle at an angle high up so that he knows he's not going to hit anybody, and he fires. He fires until the threat is gone. He fires until these people are on their way out and he knows that they're leaving. You heard the state talk about how Mr. Kelly's rifle had a 30-round magazine. It can be emptied in a matter of seconds. Mr. Kelly didn't empty his magazine, not even close. Mr. Kelly fired 8, 9 shots, and then he stopped. He stopped because the threat stopped. The threat was gone, and he stopped. What he did to protect himself and to protect his wife was effective. These folks run away. Wanda, she's inside the house. She can hear these shots. These shots are coming from close by. She can hear them. She freezes. She can't even look out the window. She's so scared that her husband might be out there dead. She doesn't know what happened. She doesn't know how long she stands there, afraid to look out and see what happened. She doesn't want to see his body when she looks out the window. She gets the courage eventually to look out. She doesn't see Alan. She's relieved. She sees him walking on the road towards the barn. He tells her he's okay. He says he's going to go check on his barn, and he walks in that direction to make sure that his barn is secure. He walks on his road to make sure people are gone and to make sure he and his wife are truly safe. As he does that, he has another phone call with Agent Morcell. He tells Agent Morcell that he saw these folks, and Agent Morcell asks him if Mr. Kelly was being shot at or if they were armed. Mr. Kelly says something to the effect of, "It's too far away to tell if they are all armed," something along those lines. Agent Morcell interprets that as Mr. Kelly saying, now he doesn't say anybody is armed. Now he's changed his statement. This misunderstanding between Mr. Kelly and Agent Morcell is later used against Mr. Kelly. Unfortunately, the phone calls that Mr. Kelly has with Agent Morcell are not recorded, and so we're never going to know the exact words that Mr. Kelly used in this case. And this is the first of a very unfortunate theme in this case, the theme of words being changed, of meanings being misunderstood, of statements being twisted. And we will see this again. Agent Morcell, eventually, he sends his agents out there, the sheriff's department. They're going out there to investigate this offense, to see what's happening. They get out there and they begin to search the area. The deputies who are searching the area are themselves carrying rifles because they're told the nature of the call. There may be armed people, there may be shots fired, So they're taking precautions. The deputies walk all over Mr. Kelly's property. They fan out in this area near where Mr. Kelly said he was shooting. They spread out and they walk through it. They walk through the pasture that's out there, the yard. They go beyond Mr. Kelly's 2 fences, all the way back into where the wash is. Multiple deputies are out there searching that area. They're looking for people who might be hiding, people who might be hurt. They're looking for people who might be under trees or under bushes. They're looking in washes. They're looking for people who might be on the ground. And they don't find anybody. They don't find anybody who's injured or hiding. They don't find anybody who's dead or dying. They don't find anybody at all. They don't find any sign of the men that Mr. Kelly described or anybody else. Everybody's gone. They find Mr. Kelly, and then they briefly talk with Mr. Kelly about what happened. Deputies, a number of them, talk to Mr. Kelly. They talk to Wanda. They don't record their interactions. They don't, record the conversations. So we don't know, again, exactly what is said. And here we see words that get changed. We see differences in different reports. It's very unclear what was actually said, and because nothing was recorded, we don't know what was actually said. Nobody at this point did a thorough interview with Mr. Kelly or his wife. This was brief. They were generally searching for people. They didn't find any people, and when they figured we didn't find any people, there's really not much for us to do here. We'll document the incident and we'll go home. So nobody ever sat down with either Mr. Kelly or Wanda and said, talk me through this. Let's take this one step at a time. Let's go through this slowly. While you talk, I'll ask you some clarifying questions if I have them. If I hear something that's I think is wrong, I'm going to tell you, and you can tell me if I misunderstand that. Nobody ever did that at this point with Mr. Kelly or his wife, and nobody ever recorded any other interactions with Mr. Kelly or his wife out there. Law enforcement leaves. Mr. Kelly and his wife are spooked and exhausted from this incident. They're shaken, but they figure that it's over, and they're grateful that they're both unharmed. They think that's the end of it. This has already been a very long and traumatic day for the Kellys, but unfortunately, their nightmare's just beginning at this point.
What a day. I get upset if I have to stop at the store on the way home from work because I'm too tired. What a day they had. She's a really good storyteller.
Later that evening, they think this is all over. Everything's over and done with. Later that evening, Mr. Kelly goes outside to check on his horse. He always brings Sonny, the horse, into the closer pastures in the evening, and this is part of his routine. He's checking on Sonny again because Sonny was very spooked during this incident, and he wants to make sure again that his horse, Sonny, is okay. Mr. Kelly's dogs, he's got 2 dogs, they go out with him. They go everywhere with him. 2 dogs are always with Mr. Kelly when he's out on his property. He goes outside and he's getting his horse taken care of and squared away for the night. And then he notices that his dogs are looking at something. His dogs are circling around something in the grass. And this is about 115 yards away from his house. This is outside of 2 separate fences. If you go outside of the house onto the patio, there's a fence, there's a pasture, there's another fence. We're beyond the second fence, very far away from Mr. Kelly's house. He goes up to see what the dogs are looking at. And he approaches and he sees the body of Gabriel Quenbutimea. When he sees that body, he freezes. One of those moments again where time sort of stands still for Mr. Kelly. He thinks, oh my goodness, he's just discovered a body on his property. He sees his dogs sniffing and nudging the body. He notices The body seems to be stiff. And his background tells him this person might have rigor mortis of some kind. He's stiff. He notices the dogs and he sees the limbs are stiff. The sun's going down at this point. It's almost dark. He's looking at the body. He sees this is a man. He sees this man is wearing a camouflage backpack. It's not a big backpack like the group that he saw earlier. This isn't in the place where he saw the group earlier. And he notices there's a camouflage fanny pack also next to the body, hanging down, not really attached to anything. And he's remembering that single shot that he heard earlier in the day before he went outside. That single shot is coming back to him. He's in shock. He stands frozen. He's never found a body before. He's never seen a dead person before. He doesn't know what to do, but a million thoughts are racing through his mind. He knows he fired shots earlier. He knows the body's on his property. He knows that somebody might be thinking to blame this on him. He is scared out of his mind. He's remembering again that single shot that he heard. He also knows there might be people around him. He doesn't know if he's alone. He doesn't know who else is out there. Obviously, tons of people were on his property throughout the day, and he doesn't know if anybody else is out there. He is scared. In spite of this fear, he calls for help. In spite of knowing, oh my gosh, this might come back on me, he calls for help. He does the right thing. He calls the ranch liaison because that's who he calls. That's the call that he makes whenever he's seeing something go on his property. So he calls Jeremy Morcell, Agent Morcell. He has faith that this can be investigated, law enforcement will handle this, and everything's going to be okay. That faith turns out to be very misplaced. When he calls Agent Morcell, and again, no phone call to Agent Morcell is actually recorded. Agent Morcell remembers these conversations a certain way. Mr. Kelly remembers these conversations a different way. We don't know what was actually said because we don't have a recording. But he calls Agent Morcell. He says something, this is very bad. Send the sheriff out here. Send help out here now. According to Agent Morcell, he's saying something may have been struck earlier. That's what Agent Morcell says that Mr. Kelly says. Mr. Kelly's in shock.
Well, that's a humongous difference right there, isn't it?
He's scared. He sounds serious. Agent Morcell has never heard him like this before. He says he doesn't want to talk over the phone. He still doesn't know who might be listening or who might be out there. Agent Morcell calls another Border Patrol agent. He calls an Agent Layugan, and he relays that information to Agent Layugan. Agent Layugan calls the Sheriff's Department and says something that influences very seriously the way law enforcement responds to this call. Agent Layugan, whether on purpose or by accident, but in a very big way, changes Mr. Kelly's words. Mr. Kelly, according to Agent Morcell, who spoke with Mr. Kelly, said, something may have been struck. I need you to, something may have been struck earlier. Agent Layugan takes that and he says to the dispatcher, the homeowner's reporting, I may have struck something. He said, I may have struck something. Not what Mr. Kelly said. Makes a big difference though. Makes all the difference possibly. This is the first, not the last example of words being changed. This monumental statement goes to the dispatcher with the Sheriff's Department. This is the person who's responsible for telling the deputies who are going out there, responsible for telling them, here's what you're going to see, here's what you're going to encounter, this is the call that came in. So when she gets on the radio to tell the deputies to go out there, she's saying, you know, the homeowner says he may have shot someone. Now it's not may have struck someone, it's he may have shot someone. That's what the homeowner said. I may have shot someone. not what Mr. Kelly said. That's what law enforcement hears when they're on their way to answer this call. And that affects the way the deputies approach this call when they get out there. The deputies are viewing this case one way and one way only. And this is their first step in the investigation. This big change influences and establishes the bias in the investigation against Mr. Kelly. The dispatch then calls Mr. Kelly to talk to him. You heard that call, and you're going to hear that call again. Mr. Kelly is nervous and in shock, but he answers the phone and he speaks to the lady who's doing the dispatch. Mr. Kelly cannot bring himself to tell her that there's a dead person on his property. He's scared, he's in shock. He's never found a dead body before. He can't say the words. There is a dead person here. I'm looking at a dead person. That's hard. It's very, very hard. They're not coming out. It's not working. So he tries to tell her a different way, and that call reflects that. He tells her he doesn't want to get in trouble. He doesn't want to get her in trouble. He says these things. He does. He says these things. And he says these things because in that moment of shock and fear and discovery, he's thinking, they might think I did this. They might think I did this. And he's right. And his fear is reasonable. So when he makes those comments in his shock and in his fear, and somebody who's not troubled by this wouldn't make those comments. Somebody who's not troubled by this would say, I found a dead body. He's troubled by this. He's scared. He doesn't know what to do. He's rattled beyond anything. Dispatch keeps asking him questions, and he communicates to dispatch that there is a body out there. He says it in so many ways without actually using the words because he can't use the words. But you can tell from that phone call that he's struggling and he's trying to communicate this fact so that he can get some help. He says, there's the body of an animal, as opposed to a vegetable or a mineral. You know what I'm saying. He's trying to get dispatch to acknowledge what he's saying. He's not trying to treat anybody like within an inhumane manner. He's trying to communicate the facts in the only way that he can to find the words to do so. Eventually, he references the dead woman, the woman that he and Mrs. Kelly had heard about on that trip when Mr. Kelly was in the White Mountains. He says, remember that situation. Come on, dispatcher. You're going to understand it now. Remember that situation. That's what we have here. The body. Okay. Dispatch finally gets it. And he doesn't want to use this word either because he's still outside. He still doesn't know who might be around him or who might be listening. When dispatch sends out the deputies, she tells the deputies that Mr. Kelly was being evasive when he had this conversation with her. So that's another example of bias in this characterization of Mr. Kelly's words as being evasive. She could have used a different word. She could have said, he sounds scared. He sounds like he's in shock. He sounds like he's afraid to speak to me directly. He sounds hesitant to use certain words. She chose the word evasive, and she spread that characterization to the deputies who were responding to the scene.
The judge is evading right now. Sit back down.
So now the deputies think, we're going to go talk to this guy who's being evasive and who says he admitted he might have shot someone. Not at all the way Mr. Kelly reported this, but that's what the deputies are thinking when they go out there. When the deputies arrive, Mr. Kelly takes them to where the body is. And you'll note he has a conversation with Deputy Lopez, who's the first one out there on the scene who talks to him. And once law enforcement is there, Mr. Kelly says, there's a person, there's a body, there's a person. He is over there. He uses that language now that he knows there's somebody else who's there on the scene. The deputies that get there can see that there's a single gunshot wound a single shot going through the side of the body and coming out through the chest.
All right. Sorry to interrupt
No
you,
worries.
but we do need to take an afternoon break. So we'll take the break now. Take about a 15-minute break. I know some of you wanted to see the jury commissioner, Juan Pablo Guzman, maybe about related to work or what you have to submit. So I'm seeing if he can come up now and talk to you during this break. And if not, we'll put him together with you first thing next week. All right, we'll take a 15-minute recess. We'll come back at about 3 o'clock, and we'll continue with the opening statement.
I was listening to that, Judge. Hold on, we'll fast forward it through 15 minutes.
Please rise, por favor. Okay, thank you. Everyone, please be seated. We're back on the record. The record will show the presence of all the jurors, counsel, and the defendant. Ms. Larkin, whenever you're ready, you can continue with your opening statement.
Thank you. You still hear me? Are they still working? Okay. And I want to get into the description of what the deputies find when they come and they examine this scene. I want to circle back a little bit because I neglected to mention a couple of things, very basic. But when Mr. Kelly went out onto his patio and when he fired the shots in the upward direction and he sees the individuals with the backpacks run off, he also notices something else. He notices movement coming from a different direction further away. He doesn't see people at that time, but he notices movement, and he thinks that perhaps there are other individuals out there. When the deputies arrive the first time on scene, he mentions to those deputies that there might have been two groups out there, and that's something that he tells them from the very beginning. So I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to mention that. So when the deputies do arrive to examine the scene and to examine the body, and they find that this man is down there on the ground on his stomach with that single gunshot wound going through his side and coming out his chest. The body turns out to be later identified as somebody named Gabriel Butimea. He's face down. He's wearing a camouflage backpack. That backpack is pulled over his head. So the backpack's not on his back where it normally would be. It's up over his head more. And it appears to be unzipped. There are certain zippers that are undone on this backpack. The fanny pack that Gabriel was carrying is really not attached to him in a normal way. It might be dangling from the backpack or lying at his side, but it's very unusual because the fanny pack appears to be next to him rather than on him. Gabriel's wearing tan pants and he's wearing a camouflage shirt with a jacket over the top. Gabriel has a radio on his hip, one of those two-way radios. The deputies don't find any drugs. They don't find any guns on Gabriel. They do find that radio. They also find a cell phone inside Gabriel's jacket. So he had a radio with him and he had a cell phone with him. Mr. Kelly, while the deputies are out examining the crime scene, he makes some statements to the deputies while they're looking at the body. He expresses that he's puzzled because the deputies didn't find the body earlier when they had searched through this area where it was eventually located. And he says, maybe this happened after you left, trying to explain how it could be that there were deputies searching this area when he originally called and they didn't find this person there. He says he doesn't know what happened. Mr. Kelly then is moved away from the body and he's told he has to stand outside with one of the deputies who's there. He asks for water and the deputy tells him, no, you can't go inside to get water. He's told he can't go back into his house and that he has to stay where he is. And then Wanda, who was inside the house and doesn't really know what's going on, they take her outside of the house and they tell her to sit in the back of a patrol car. And she sits in the back of the patrol car, and those doors are locked. She can't get out of the patrol car. She doesn't know what's going on. Nobody tells her what's going on. She's confused. She's scared. She doesn't know why she's sitting in the back of a patrol car all of a sudden. She doesn't understand why she's been separated from her husband on the scene, and she doesn't know what's going on with him. She does see Mr. Kelly being walked past the car that she's in, and he's in handcuffs now. She sees that, her husband in handcuffs, walking past the car where she's sitting. And now she's very scared. She doesn't know what's going on. Now he's being taken to the police station to go be questioned. They're both scared. Neither one of them know what's going on. They just know this is bad, and this is not what we thought was going to happen. We didn't see our day ending like this at all. Mr. Kelly does an interview at the sheriff's department, their investigation unit, and he is interviewed by Detective Einsa and Detective Barba. They're both sitting in on the interview. He agrees to talk to them because he wants this case to be solved. He wants to find out what's happening. He wants to tell them what he knows. And he agrees to talk to them. And he hopes that if he talks to them, they'll understand what he's saying and they will help him try to find out what the truth is, to try to find out what happened to Gabriel. The evidence is going to show that this interview is very, very hostile. It's clear that the detectives in this are not interested in anything other than obtaining evidence of Mr. Kelly's guilt. They're not interested in being open-minded to listen to what he's saying. And once again, we find examples of law enforcement changing Mr. Kelly's words when he doesn't say what they want him to say, when he doesn't say the thing that makes him guilty. Mr. Kelly, during this interview, continuously denies shooting anybody. He's asked repeatedly, and he repeatedly denies it. He denies that he shot at anybody. He says, I never shot at anybody. I never shot in the direction of people. The detective in this interview directly accuses Mr. Kelly of shooting this person, and Mr. Kelly continues to deny it. Mr. Kelly tells the detectives that he fired up into the air, and he brings his arms up to try to demonstrate the direction that he was firing. The detectives don't bother to put a map, let's say, of his property in front of him. They don't bother to ask him to point out where specifically were you standing when you fired these shots. They don't bother to ask him what direction he was firing in. They don't walk him through the scene. And a lot of investigations do that. When there's a shooting and the shooter is a cooperative person, the investigators take them to the scene and they say, show me where you were standing. Show me where you saw the people. Show me where you were aiming. Show me this, show me that. That's a common thing that investigators do for shooting incidents. They didn't do that in this case. They didn't even give him a picture of the scene. They didn't have him draw anything. They didn't allow him to do anything to truly show them where he was, where these people were, and which direction he was firing in. They didn't bother. In this interview, they tell Mr. Kelly that they're going to do ballistics. And they tell him, listen, we're going to do ballistics. If those ballistics show that that bullet came from your gun, then you're going to be in really big trouble. They continue to pressure him to tell the truth. They tell him to help yourself out. In spite of all of this browbeating that he's getting by these detectives, he doesn't waver. he continues to tell them what happened. At one point in this interview, the detective tells Mr. Kelly that his statements don't add up. He says, they're inconsistent. You're making inconsistent statements. Mr. Kelly asks the detective, he says, what do you mean? In what way are my statements inconsistent? What do you mean? And the detective doesn't tell him. He just says, well, what we've heard on scene, what you're saying here, it doesn't match, doesn't add up, doesn't give him any opportunity to explain or to clarify or to otherwise try to bring some understanding where there might be a misunderstanding. The detective doesn't give specific examples to Mr. Kelly. Well, here's what was said here, and this is inconsistent with what you're saying now. Doesn't do that. They've already decided that he's guilty. And then the detectives do something even worse than that. They go beyond browbeating. They go beyond not listening. They change Mr. Kelly's words. We've talked about this before. They changed his words before. They changed his words again. This time, it's written down. This time, it is recorded. And this time, there is no denying that what these law enforcement officials did was change Mr. Kelly's words. The detective writes down on a booking form, which is a form they fill out when you're arresting someone, and you write down, here's the probable cause we have for arresting this person. On that form, the detective writes down that Mr. Kelly admitted in this interview that he shot at multiple subjects. That was written on the booking form. Mr. Kelly admitted that he shot at multiple subjects. This isn't true. Mr. Kelly did not ever say that in the interview. And this is recorded and this is transcribed. The detective will acknowledge that that's what he did. He changed Mr. Kelly's words. He wrote down essentially that Mr. Kelly confessed to this offense when Mr. Kelly did no such thing. He changed Mr. Kelly's words so that what the detectives say Mr. Kelly said is the opposite of what Mr. Kelly said. In the interview, Mr. Kelly said, I never shot at anybody. And on the booking form, the detective wrote down, Mr. Kelly was interviewed and admitted to shooting at multiple subjects. The evidence will show that the detectives changed Mr. Kelly's words. During this interview, the evidence will also show Mr. Kelly offers to tell the detective where his rifle is. Mr. Kelly wants them to do ballistics. Mr. Kelly hopes that they find a bullet. Mr. Kelly knows that he did not shoot this person, and so he wants to help them out. So he says to the detective, I'll tell you where the rifle is. The detective says, no, we'll just get a search warrant. At this point, Mr. Kelly's been so browbeat, he just goes, okay, fine. The detective's not interested in Mr. Kelly's help. And later, the evidence will show that gets turned into this argument about Mr. Kelly trying to hide his weapon from investigators, when in fact, the opposite happened. He told the investigators, I will tell you where this weapon is. They said no, they weren't interested in his help. Then there are some attempts to justify this behavior. The same detective, the one who filled out the booking form and put the wrong words in the booking form, at first, earlier in this case, there was a preliminary hearing where that detective testified, and he was asked about that. At first, he said he did not fill out the booking form. And he said, nope, I have nothing to do with the booking. I didn't fill out that form. That was not true. That's what that detective said under oath. Later, at another hearing in this case, the detective eventually admitted, Yes, I did fill out that booking form. So the detective came around and changed what he was saying. He made inconsistent statements, that detective, and those were made under oath. At another hearing, that same detective was asked about his reasons for arresting Mr. Kelly. And he justified Mr. Kelly's arrest by saying he made inconsistent statements. When actually, when the detective was challenged to provide what were those statements that Mr. Kelly made that were so inconsistent, the detective couldn't provide those. And so the detective just made something up. This is at a hearing under oath. The detective testified under oath that Mr. Kelly, in his interview, the initial interview he had with the detective, first denied having shot his rifle at all, and then later Mr. Kelly admitted to firing his rifle. That was brought forward by the detective as one of Mr. Kelly's inconsistent statements to justify arresting him. Once again, not true. Mr. Kelly never ever denied firing his rifle. The detective was having a hard time with these questions, and so he just made up an inconsistency that didn't exist. The investigators in this case have obviously decided that if evidence against Mr. Kelly doesn't exist, or if they can't think of it in the moment, it is okay to just make it up. The evidence is going to show that this entire investigation is just as biased as that interview with Mr. Kelly. Law enforcement officials are putting words into his mouth that he never said. They accuse and confront him in his interview, and they act later to confirm their own bias rather than finding the truth. The evidence will show that law enforcement does not investigate any other possible explanation for Gabriel's death. They don't get a bullet. They can't recover a bullet, so they can't match this wound to any gun or anything. They don't initially order much forensic investigation. They don't wait. They don't take the time to really do the investigation that they should. They just arrest Mr. Kelly. They could have waited. You know, there's no law that says these detectives have to make an arrest the moment they suspect someone. They didn't have to do that. They could have done a thorough investigation first. They could have tested some other possibilities, some other explanations first. They didn't do that. They eventually find out there's no bullet, so they can't prove that this shot was fired from this weapon. And now there's no way for them to even prove which kind of weapon caused the wound that killed Gabriel. So now the investigation is in a difficult place. It's a weaker case. This investigation desperately needs witnesses now. And sure enough, they come out of the woodwork. There are a number of different people who've come forward in this investigation and claimed that they were witnesses to this event. The state's here in this trial, and you're going to hear from one person. You're going to hear from Daniel, who says he was with Gabriel. Daniel says he's the only person who was with Gabriel when this happened, the only person who saw what happened. Well, it's odd then, because there are other people who've come forward and said, no, I was there. No, I was there. More than one. And those folks are making false reports about Mr. Kelly. They did so pretty quickly, as it turns out. Law enforcement didn't express any kind of concern at all that there are multiple people coming forward claiming to have been witnesses to this event. And law enforcement doesn't express any concern when those people make statements and claims that are in fact verifiably false. For example, first person who comes forward is a phone call that the sheriff's department gets the day after this incident takes place. Somebody calling up, claiming to be called Miguel, And he claims that he's related to Gabriel. He says, that's my uncle. I know Gabriel, he's my uncle. And I was there, and I saw my uncle get shot. That's what he says. He never comes forward after that. This phone call, there's voices in the background of other people who are talking to him while he's talking to law enforcement. And law enforcement doesn't follow up on this for months and months. And that's sort of a casual. They meet with some of Gabriel's family members and they say, hey, doesn't he have a nephew named Miguel? Family members, no, he doesn't. There is no nephew Miguel. Who's that? So somebody claiming to be related to this person calls law enforcement and they make claims and statements about this case, and those are verifiably false. Does this concern law enforcement? No. Does law enforcement think maybe this Miguel person is a potential suspect? No. Does law enforcement do anything to follow up to find out what's happening here? No. They don't care. They've got their guy. They're not interested in other possibilities. Shortly after that, that's Miguel. Shortly after Miguel, you have Ramon. Ramon shows up. Ramon is picked up in, I believe, Sonoita for alien smuggling. He's trafficking people through somewhere, and Border Patrol picks him up. And after he gets arrested, he says, hey, I was there. I was there. They take a statement from Ramon. They talk to him. Ramon says some things that are concerning. He says he recognizes Mr. Kelly from the news. He says, I saw this on the news. And I recognize him because I saw him on the news. I was there. He makes some more statements that contradict objective physical evidence in the case. Many such statements that contradict objective physical evidence in the case. Many such statements that are verifiably false based on what law enforcement knows about the scene and about what took place. Does law enforcement pursue that? Do they challenge Ramon? Do they consider Ramon to be a possible suspect? Do they ask questions about why now not one person but two people have come forward to say, Mr. Kelly did it, he's the bad guy, and those statements don't match up with anything and they seem to be false statements? Is that a concern for law enforcement? No, they have their guy. They don't need to worry about investigating other things. So we get Miguel, we get Ramon, then we get Daniel. Daniel comes forward in a very controlled manner. This is controlled by Gabriel's family and controlled by a supposed family member who goes by the name of Juan Carlos Rodriguez. That person somehow communicates with the sheriff's department, and that person says, okay, we found someone. We have someone who was with Gabriel when he died. It's this guy. It's Daniel. Okay. So the family arranges for Daniel to come talk to law enforcement about what happened. And then we have another strange thing occur in this case. The Sheriff Hathaway himself personally decides to get involved in this case. And Sheriff Hathaway himself personally, as part of this investigation, goes into Mexico to conduct this criminal investigation. And he goes in there, the evidence is going to show twice. First time to just meet with the family members, but he goes into Mexico to do that and doesn't document that meeting until much, much later, after he's told, you didn't document this, you got to document this. And then he goes with another detective. So Sheriff Hathaway goes himself personally with a detective, Barba. They travel into Mexico to have this criminal investigation, to conduct this criminal investigation. The evidence is going to show that there's no legal authority for the sheriff to do that. The evidence is going to show that Sheriff Hathaway did not go through any diplomatic channels in order to conduct an investigation in Mexico. He didn't liaise with any Mexican official, didn't do anything. He just went into Mexico to meet with the witness at a hotel across the line. He went with Detective Barba, as I mentioned. Gabriel has 2 adult daughters who were present at the meeting. This Juan Carlos Rodriguez person was there. They're all in this interview with Daniel. That interview takes about 45 minutes. They talk to Daniel. They don't record that interview. After the interview is finished, Sheriff Hathaway records a summary of the interview. So he gets the witness to essentially say again, tell us again what you just told this detective, but now we're going to record you. That recording lasts 6 minutes. So that's the documentation that they did of the interview that took place in Mexico with Daniel. After that interview, Daniel provides numerous other interviews, and Daniel testifies in a preliminary hearing in this case. Over the course of these numerous interviews, it becomes clear that DRR, Daniel, I'm used to using his initials, Daniel, he continuously changes and adjusts his story. And it's also very apparent that Daniel is handled by whoever's interviewing him very differently from how Mr. Kelly was handled. If Daniel says something that's verifiably false, for example, he gets an opportunity to explain it. He gets an opportunity to clarify. And inevitably, if he is caught in an outright lie, which does happen, he'll claim that he just misunderstood the question. That's what he does. The evidence will show that he makes many claims that are in fact verifiably false and that his claims are never challenged. He's always given the benefit of the doubt. Daniel's claims are contradicted by numerous other pieces of evidence in this case that I want you to watch out for while you're hearing this evidence. He's contradicted by other witness statements. So Miguel and Ramon tend to contradict him, as well as Mr. and Mrs. Kelly. He contradicts his own claims by changing what he says over time. And his claims are contradicted by the physical evidence in the case. I'm not going to go into every single inconsistency that Daniel has now. While you're listening to him testify, I want you to ask yourself, how does what he says actually match up with the physical evidence in this case? And the evidence is going to show that his statements do not match up. The evidence is going to show that it's in fact impossible to believe that Daniel was present when Gabriel was shot. For example, right off the bat, Daniel says all of this happened west of Nogales. Mr. Kelly's property is east of Nogales. Daniel's asked numerous times, where did this happen? East or west of Nogales? West. Not possible. Daniel states that after he was shot, Gabriel fell over backwards and landed on his side or on his back after he was shot. Also, not possible. Bodies found on the stomach. So if DRR is telling the truth and he fell over backwards, then after Gabriel was shot, his body was turned over. And that changes everything too. It's not possible to believe what Daniel says. Daniel also says that right after the shooting took place, Mr. Kelly stood over Gabriel's body, that Daniel saw that. He looked back, he was close, he saw him. He saw Mr. Kelly standing right there over Gabriel's body. The evidence is going to show that that is not possible. Not only is this 115 yards away from where Mr. Kelly was when he was firing, in order for Mr. Kelly to stand over Gabriel's body, he He has to climb over 2 barbed wire fences and cover that distance in a very short time at his age. That's not possible. The evidence is going to show that. The evidence is going to show that Mr. Kelly is actually seen on camera by Border Patrol in a very different area after this shooting happens, nowhere near where Gabriel is found. Daniel also says that this shooting happened right next to the border wall. He says we were 15 meters away from the border wall. It was right there when this shooting happened. Not possible. This took place over a mile and a half as the crow flies away from the border wall. Daniel also says that a horse was shot and killed in this incident. Not just shot and killed. And he stuck with that. Shot and killed, and the horse fell down, and I saw the horse fall down.
Stop.
Not possible. Daniel also says that Gabriel was not wearing a 2-way radio. He says, I was there, I was with Gabriel. He was just a migrant looking for the American dream. He was not wearing a radio. Not possible. Gabriel was wearing a radio. Daniel will also say that he and Gabriel, right before the shooting happened, they were right next to a road. And he got specific. He said it's the road that Border Patrol uses to get to the end of the wall. It's the road that goes to the end of the wall. Not possible. There is a road that Border Patrol uses. There is a road that goes to the end of the wall. It's not on Mr. Kelly's property. It's further away. So not possible. There are many, many of these examples, but we'll wait to see what Daniel actually has to say. The biggest 3 examples of these impossible statements are that the horse was shot and killed, that Mr. Kelly stood over Gabriel's body, and that this happened right next to the border wall. Those are huge. Those are not explainable by any conclusion other than Daniel was not there. Daniel did not witness this at all. There are other instances of Daniel misrepresenting things to law enforcement or changing his story as time goes on. At first, when he meets up with Sheriff Hathaway and Detective Barba, he says that Gabriel was the smuggler. Gabriel was leading the group. Later, he changed his story. No, Gabriel wasn't the smuggler. He just wanted the American dream. It was this other guy. I don't know his name. El Cholo. It was El Cholo. He was leading the group. That's what Daniel says. During an investigation where Daniel is talking to the detectives at the county attorney's office, they ask Daniel, have you ever transported drugs into the United States? Important question. You see what this guy's background is. Have you ever transported drugs into the United States? Daniel says, no, never. I've never done that. Well, turns out he has. That was not true. He lied about that in this investigation. The defense's investigation revealed that Daniel had been convicted in federal court of transporting marijuana into the United States. He took a plea in federal court under oath where he admitted that he transported drugs into the United States. And he did some time in federal prison as a result of that offense. When he was confronted with this information later, I just misunderstood the question. I thought when you asked me, have I ever transported drugs into the United States, I thought what you meant was, did I have any drugs with me when I was with Gabriel? Does that go challenged? No. Nope, that explanation's perfectly accepted by law enforcement. Daniel also stated under oath that he had not met with anybody to talk about this case until he was testifying about it. That was not true. When he made that statement, he had already had 2 separate meetings with law enforcement to talk about the case. And whenever he's questioned about any of these statements, he just says, I misunderstood the question. I didn't get it. I didn't understand what you were saying. And law enforcement just accepts those explanations. Nobody from law enforcement ever doubted or questioned Daniel's story. Daniel's statements in this investigation were always accepted as fact, and they were never subjected to any kind of meaningful scrutiny. In fact, maybe you won't be surprised by this, but law enforcement changed Daniel's statements. They changed his words to make those words fit into their story. Daniel did an interview with a detective at the county attorney's office, and the detective was translating what Daniel said to the prosecutor. He was asked in Spanish, where did this happen, east or west of Nogales? He said west. The detective who was questioning him in Spanish said, oeste, west? Daniel said yes. The detective translated that, east. He said east. That's a problem. This keeps happening in this investigation, and that is a problem. Never, in spite of all of this coming out, does law enforcement ever seem to question if they have the right guy. They never seem to question what is going on with this witness. I'm going to leave Daniel for a minute here, but again, I want to come back to the big 3, the 3 things he said that are impossible to believe. A horse was shot and killed when this happened. Impossible to believe. Mr. Kelly was standing over Gabriel's body right after this happened. Impossible to believe. And this happened right next to the border wall, 15 meters away. Impossible to believe. So keep that in mind when you're listening to this testimony and when you're evaluating this testimony. I want to talk very briefly just about the forensics that you will hear in this case. Because eventually law enforcement gets around to doing some forensic analysis of the scene. And the evidence is going to show there are some shell casings on the patio outside of Mr. Kelly's house. And the forensic evidence is going to show that there's a lot that we just can't know, we just can't prove forensically. Biggest thing is there's no bullet. And when there's no bullet, there's no proof. We can't prove that Mr. Kelly's rifle fired the shot that hit Gabriel. We can't prove it. We can't prove that his rifle did not fire the shot either. You can't prove it either way. There's nothing to hang your hat on forensically to say for sure, here's what happened or didn't happen in this case. The forensics can't prove or find out who fired the single shot, the shot that Mr. Kelly heard. Who fired that single shot that killed Gabriel? We don't know. Which direction did that shot come from? We don't know. You heard the state say that because bullet comes in here and it comes out here and he's lying on his stomach, well, it comes from the direction of the house. That's where it came from. We don't know that. We don't know how Gabriel was standing when he got hit. We don't know if he was standing when he got hit. We don't know if he took steps before he fell. We don't know if he perhaps fell over backwards, the way Daniel described it, and then was either rolled over or rolled over. We don't know any of that. There's no forensic evidence that can tell us this is how Gabriel was standing before he got shot, or even this is where he was before he got shot. We don't have that evidence. And who is Gabriel and what was Gabriel doing there? Again, there's a lot that's unknown about Gabriel, about who he is and what he was doing there. All we have is the evidence, and we look at that evidence. The witness, Daniel, says Gabriel's looking for the American dream. He's a migrant, he wants to work, and he's just traveling unarmed, doing nothing, and suddenly Mr. Kelly starts firing at him. The physical evidence tells another story. The physical evidence shows that he's carrying a radio. You're going to hear about radios. He's carrying a radio. He's carrying camouflage. His backpack and his fanny pack are camouflage. The phone, Gabriel had a phone. They examined the phone. There are some photographs of Gabriel's activity on that phone. And you're going to see photographs of Gabriel on dates that are different from January 30th. You're going to see photographs of Gabriel from prior occasions on prior dates. In those photographs, you're going to see Gabriel wearing the same clothing. Same clothing he's wearing when he dies, he's wearing on other occasions, different occasions. You're going to see him carrying a fanny pack. You're going to see him carrying it in front of him, going across his body like that. Not down at his side, not dangling off of his backpack. He carries it across his body. Photographs will show that. The photographs are going to show Gabriel standing up high on a mountaintop somewhere. Fanny pack across his chest. Radio. He's got his radio again on that date. Binoculars. He's carrying binoculars this time too. What's he doing? I think we can make an inference about that. So who is Gabriel and what's he doing on Mr. Kelly's property? Pictures are worth 1,000 words. And the pictures show that Gabriel is not somebody who's looking for the American dream. This is somebody who is engaged in trafficking. He's engaged in illegal activity. And I'm not talking about just coming across as an illegal alien. I'm talking about either scouting or smuggling, trafficking people, trafficking drugs. We don't know, but he's trafficking. He's involved in that world. And at the end of the day, the evidence is going to show that Gabriel is living a criminal lifestyle, and criminal lifestyles are dangerous. The evidence will show that there's one shot fired before Mr. Kelly leaves his house, and Gabriel died as a result of one shot. One shot, one bullet hole. That's what the evidence is going to show. The person responsible for firing that single shot is also the person responsible for Gabriel's death that day. And that person is not Mr. Kelly. Law enforcement had a bias going into this investigation, and they wrapped the evidence around Mr. Kelly. They decided he was guilty, and they made it work. They didn't let the evidence lead them to their conclusions. They let their predetermined conclusions lead them to their interpretations of the evidence. And this is why at the end of this, we will be asking all of you to render a not guilty verdict in this case. We're asking that each one of you listen to each witness very carefully. You heard my co-counsel yesterday talk to you about they start with a clean slate. You take them as they are. You start with no preconceived notions. Listen to what they say. Compare what they say to the other evidence in the case. We're asking that you not make the same mistake law enforcement did. Don't start with the mindset that Mr. Kelly shot this person. Start with the mindset of wanting to seek the truth, of wanting to go where the evidence leads, not the other way around. And we're asking you especially to consider the physical evidence in this case. Everybody has statements. Statements need to be tested against the physical evidence. That's the most important thing, the facts. Very particularly, we want you to understand the distance from Mr. Kelly's patio to where this body was eventually located. Pay close attention to all the photographs that you see, the drone footage that you see of this property, and pay close attention to the number of obstacles that are in between where Mr. Kelly was standing and where Gabriel was eventually discovered. You're going to see pergola legs. You're going to see smokers. You're going to see many, many trees. You're going to see wood piles. You're going to see fences. you're going to see dozens and dozens of obstacles in between where Mr. Kelly was standing and where Gabriel's body was eventually discovered. And you're not going to see in any of those obstacles, you're not going to see a bullet hole. You're not going to see any lead residue on any of those obstacles. The state is going to try to convince you that Mr. Kelly fired 9 shots through this field of obstacles with the intent of hitting Gabriel, who he can barely see from the patio and who he can't see from inside the house. The state is going to try to convince you that 9 shots went through this field of obstacles and left no bullet holes and no lead residue. There's a broken branch in this field of obstacles, a single broken branch. This is a pasture. This field of obstacles is in a pasture. Animals all over this place all the time. In that broken branch, again, there's no bullet hole, there's no lead residue, there's no evidence whatsoever that that branch was hit by a bullet. There's no evidence that any bullets went through this field of obstacles, let alone 9 of them. So keep the physical evidence in mind, keep the forensic evidence in mind when you're listening to witnesses tell their stories. Keep other witness statements in mind to compare with the witnesses that you're hearing, and keep the known facts of the case in mind to have in mind when you're listening to people testify. The facts that can't be disputed. Have those in mind when you're listening to the witnesses. The state in this case is going to ask you to speculate about motives and meanings. He sent this text message. Here's what he meant. This is what he thought. This is what he felt. They're going to ask you to make subjective determinations about what certain phrases mean. They're going to ask you to make subjective determinations about what somebody feels or what somebody thinks. We're not going to ask you to do that. We're going to ask you to not speculate. We're going to ask you to rely on the facts of this case, the facts, the things that we know. And finally, before I wrap up, I just want all of you to remember, co-counsel talked about it yesterday, but remember who has the burden of proof. This table has the burden of proof. This table has to prove to you that Mr. Kelly shot Gabriel. We don't have to prove that he didn't, and we don't have to prove that he's innocent. All right? It's their job to prove that he shot Gabriel. And they can't do it. And remember why the burden of proof is the way that it is. We're asking you at the end of this trial, after hearing all this evidence, to render a not guilty verdict. And I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Larkin. Let me get counsel on the headset for a second before we do anything else. This is off, right? All right. So my judicial assistant says you have 2 witnesses. I want to recess now, but I want to hear you out. The reason I want to recess now is, go ahead. I'm not going to do it. I'm looking at this jury. This has been a very long day. I was intending at the close of this opening statement to recess for the day. I'm looking at them. They're tired. It's been a long day. If this were late in the trial or even in the middle of the trial and we were running behind schedule and you had a witness that had an expectation that they were going to testify earlier than they ultimately were able to, that would be a different matter. I'd accommodate that. We're on day 1 of this trial. You got all your witnesses under subpoena. They've had plenty of notice about this court date. I don't know who the witness is. It doesn't matter. This is when I want to recess the trial because these people are tired. I want to start fresh with all the evidence and the testimony Tuesday morning. The request is denied. We're going to recess for the day. Briefly. Well, why is that my problem? You have your witnesses under subpoena. You knew the schedule of the trial. I'm going to conduct this trial according to what I believe is in the best interest for the presentation of evidence in consideration of this jury. These people are tired. It's a long day. We had long opening statements, including by the state. I didn't stop anybody. I'm not critical of the opening statement. It was good in the sense that Ms. Hunley covered a lot of territory. She covered it efficiently, and she moved through it. And there's a lot to cover, but it took a lot of time. The defense took a lot of time. It's 4 o'clock. We're going to adjourn. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the jury, we're about to adjourn in a moment. I am going to do something that I neglected to do right after you were sworn, but it's brief. I'm going to read you the formal charge in this case. This is the charge from what's called an information. So the charge and the information is the formal statement of what the charges are against this particular defendant. The caption of the case is always a caption of the case. It has the name of the case, the State of Arizona Plaintiff versus George Allen Kelly, Defendant. It reads as follows. In the name and by the authority of the State of Arizona, George Allen Kelly, date of birth 1/27/1949, accused by the County Attorney of Santa Cruz County, State of Arizona, by this information filed with the clerk of the above titled court this 15th day of March 2024 of the crime committed as follows. Count 1, second-degree murder. George Allen Kelly, on or about January 30, 2023, did commit second-degree murder by causing the death of GCB without premeditation. Count 2, aggravated assault. It alleges George Allen Kelly, on or about January 30th, 2023, using a rifle, a deadly weapon or dangerous instrument, intentionally did place DRV, also known as DRR, in reasonable apprehension of imminent physical injury. All of the above, as set forth, contrary to the form, force, and effect of the statute in such cases, made and provided against the peace and dignity of the State of Arizona. It's signed by Ms. Kimberly J. Hunley, Chief Deputy County Attorney. All right, we're going to recess for the day. The admonition, it's going to be a long weekend, 3 days. We're going to come back Tuesday morning. I'm going to order that you be present in the jury room Tuesday morning at 8:30 assembled. Once again, we can't do anything until you're all present, so please all be punctual. Remember the admonition. All right, there's obviously media coverage of this case, I'm not going to read the whole admonition again, but you understand that you must make every single effort, not only not to look at it, any of it, but to avoid it. Do not talk about the case with each other. Do not talk about the case with your family or friends. Again, you can only tell people you're on a jury and what the schedule is of the trial. Do not do any independent research on your own. Do not go to the sites. Do not investigate. Do not do any research on the internet about anything else about this case. Just seal it off. You're only able to consider the evidence and testimony produced in court. And you've just got to seal yourself off from things that you ordinarily would do.
Stay
Like
out of
looking at
social
social media, if that's what you do, or watching news shows, if that's what you do. You're just going to have to stop it for 4 weeks. Any questions? All right. I also forgot to tell you, I think my assistant mentioned to you, in court in the afternoons, you can bring coffee or anything in a cup after the noon break. Okay. Just be very careful, because first time I allowed someone to do that, they quickly spilled coffee all over the carpet. It was a big mess. So just be very careful, but I understand it'd be nice to have a cup of coffee or a soda or something in the afternoon. Any questions? We'll see you Tuesday morning at 8:30, and I will see counsel on this matter Monday morning at 9 o'clock on an issue before the court, right? We're adjourned for the weekend. Have a good weekend.
Whew, okay, we made it through day one. All right, I didn't talk a lot during this video, so I can't actually post this video because YouTube will nail me. So I'm going to take some time and try to edit it in a way that'll allow me to post it. And then I think I'm gonna always put these videos out at I'm trying to pick a good time in my head. I think I'm gonna put these videos out in the evening, but not too late. Maybe even 6 o'clock. That's it. I'm gonna put these videos out at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every day. Oh, not every day. Sorry. Look, I still have to get my other stuff done. But maybe not every day, but it's 18 days of court. We can blow through this quick. It's that's what I saw so far. Plus, I saw the end, and that lawyer is so great. So I'm outstandingly interested in what happens next, and we'll get to watch it together. I'm gonna try to. Oh, sugar. 1:14 a.m. I have 3 hours to get my stream together. Less than that because I have to have it done before I start. Oh, I don't have time to edit this, so I won't be getting this out tomorrow. Fine, I won't. I can't. But I'll get it out soon. You guys don't know because you haven't seen it yet. Let me do some editing and we can get started on this. Thanks for coming out, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Hope you have a great day. Day 2 is coming soon. Don't worry. Bye.